So I recently watched this video the other day entitled "Investigation of the Divine Mercy Devotion According to Sister Faustina," and it's really interesting. He spends about an hour on the history of Poland, about an hour on the history of the Divine Mercy Devotion, and then 20 minutes on a theological critique of the devotion. And I mean, in my own opinion, I think that the theological critique kind of suffices. The idea of being devoted to a particular attribute of God, uh, which is different from, of course, devotion to the Sacred Heart or the face. In that those are parts of the person of Christ rather than a particular attribute of God. I think the idea that you would be devoted to an attribute of God is theologically problematic, at least. Um, but yeah, anyways, I'm only bringing this up because I was watching this video, and I don't really know a lot about Polish history. I mean, I have a sort of general kind of outline living in my head, but I don't know a lot of details, or I haven't really known a lot of details. My the most I've ever studied it in any depth is when I was kind of doing my tour on Metternich's Holy Alliance and the political significance of that kind of moment. So I don't really know too much about Poland. You're going to see in this video I have a very hard time pronouncing Polish words, so please forgive me for that. But there's this particular part of this video that was very interesting to me, um, describing this phenomenon of Polish Messianism and the concept of the Christ of Europe. And in listening to this, my immediate thought uh, was Sabbatean Frankism. Like my mind immediately went to this, and so um, what I'd like to do in this video is kind of lay some groundwork for a new research direction. I mean, it's not something I can take up now, but sometime in the future, and also, hope maybe invite anyone who is more knowledgeable about this particular era in Polish history, European history in general, um, uh, and just maybe cast some lines out there. What I want to do is just kind of uh, establish that there might be some kind of connection. I mean, there are clearly parallels in the ideas, um, but whether or not they're direct lines of influence, I think, is subject to debate and discussion. But so I want to establish kind of the groundwork for inquiring into this history, but then I also want to talk about the significance of this particular question, because I think it is a very, very significant question. So I'm going to play a few minutes of this, and then I'm going to get into my comment that I left on this video. I don't think that this user, Faith and Movement, responded to my comment, but I'm just going to read through it just to kind of give what were my immediate thoughts after watching this video. But yeah, okay. So this is the part on discussing this Christ of Europe concept.
And what's very important is that after this uprising, you have a new intellectual movement that starts to emerge in Poland. After all these defeats, this really this kind of a roller coaster that their country goes through or has gone through the past 40 years, from the partitions to Napoleon to this uprising, helps to give birth, as well as you have influence from the so-called Enlightenment. Um, it gives birth to this new wave of thought. Um, and you see here, I put it as 1831 because this is when the term was coined. And this was a philosophical and religious movement that held that Poland was the Christ of Europe. And this is actually a quote taken from a very interesting article on this subject. And so what you have is that you have Poles equating what happened to our Lord with the situation of their country. And specifically, this is a quote I'm pulling from this article: the suffering, chosenness, and mission of the Polish nation. People believed in the complete similarity of the situation of Christ in Poland. Golgotha was the condition of the resurrection. The martyrology of the Poles has the same end. It will lead to a new life. And so you have this concept, essentially, of the current division of Poland by these different countries and the kind of statelessness of their people. That is their Golgotha, right? But you have these writers basically prophesizing of this great time ahead where Poland will rise again on its own third day and will actually free the peoples of Europe. They won't just free the Poles, they won't just free themselves, but they're going to free everyone in Europe and defeat slavery everywhere. We're going to see more of this kind of language. But it's interesting because at the same time, you have a lot of young men becoming quite involved with the church in Poland at this time. But the thing is this author talks about, we have to kind of question the motives a little bit. Because, as he says, faith was so strongly linked with patriotic feelings that sometimes it was difficult to distinguish what was the goal and what was the means. And this is not to say that patriotism in of itself is not bad, but as we're going to see in the next few slides, this version of patriotism is a perversion of authentic patriotism, of authentic Catholic nationalism. It is basically trying to put this nation of Poland on the same level as the Catholic Church and trying to say that it's synonymous with the Church. Okay, and this gentleman right here, Adam right here, he is actually acknowledged as one of the leading romanticist of Poland at this time. Very famous writer within this country, and he has certain things to say about this. He contributes his own thoughts in this book he writes called "The Pilgrimage of the Polish Nation, 1832." I'm just going to read out these quotes. "And on the third day the soul will return to the body, and the nation will rise up from the dead and liberate all the peoples of Europe from captivity. And just as bloody sacrifices on earth came to an end with the resurrection of Christ, so wars in Christianity will cease with the resurrection of the Polish nation." And this is another excerpt. "And Poland said, 'Whosoever will come to me shall be free and equal, for I am freedom.' But the kings, when they heard it, were frightened in their hearts, and they crucified the Polish nation and laid it in its grave, crying out, 'We have slain and buried freedom.' But they cried out foolishly. For the Polish nation did not die. Its body lieth in the grave, but its spirit has descended into the abyss, that is, into the private lives of people who suffer slavery in their own country. For on the third day the soul shall return to the body, and the nation shall arise and free all the peoples of Europe from slavery." So essentially what you have going on here is intellectuals like this gentleman are reading into the New Testament during this time of great suffering for the Polish people, this great demoralization, repression, and they're reading certain things into the New Testament, and they're essentially they're doing precisely what St. Peter warns us about in one of his epistles, where he says that those who interpret the scriptures to their own devices, they bring ruin to their souls. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. And this is precisely what these gentlemen were doing. And I have the example of another writer who takes it a bit further. We're just going to call him Andre for the sake of this presentation. He was a Polish refugee from Vilnius who lived in Paris. And he actually claims to have a private revelation. He receives a vision, allegedly, from Our Lady, and a special inspiration from the Holy Ghost. It told him that basically he's the herald of this apocalypse that's coming very soon. He should be preaching the end of time and the power of divine grace. And essentially in this unraveling of basically the end of the world, that the Poles, the Jews, and the French were to play leading roles in this process. And what's interesting is that he actually believed that Napoleon would be somehow involved with this process. Even though Napoleon had been dead by this point, he experiences these visions in 1839, but Napoleon had already been dead for a few years by this time. But this actually, this belief of Napoleon, basically, his pro-Napoleon sentiments, actually, that's what gets him kicked out of France, because this is right after the restoration of the Bourbons. And actually, this is another point to bring up about this movement. That, we're going a bit further into history, but just to show you the long-term influence of writers such as the two gentlemen I have referenced here. After the election of John Paul II, J. Sawaki's verse, "Amidst quarrels God will strike," enjoyed great popularity in Poland. The work, which was written in 1848, predicted an open throne for a quote-unquote Slavic pope. So that's an example of, oh, look, this prophecy of one of our great writers got fulfilled, right? And specifically with this Slavic pope idea that this writer had, he also held that this Slavic pope was going to help restore the world, and basically, that he was going to help bring about this era of peace and whatnot, and all this stuff.
Okay, so that's enough. So these two gentlemen that he actually mentioned here, Adam Mickiewicz and Andrei Toyansky, are kind of two characters that I want to focus on a lot in this investigation, because they play, I think, a pretty prominent role in this general historical drama. Here is what I commented. Here's the significant part. Question about Polish Messianism. Do you think Frankist conversos could have been an influence on this movement? And I'm asking this question prior to doing any other additional research. Again, so it's like I think it says something that my mind kind of immediately made this connection. The Frankist role in the French Revolution is becoming more and more well known in the English-speaking world. The YouTube user Didymus Sumidid translated Gershom Shalem's work from Frankism to Jacobinism into English, and I highly recommend picking up a copy. The work discusses the life of Moses Dobrushka, a Frankist who assumed a fake identity and became active as a Jacobin during the Revolution. There's plenty of good information about the relationship of the Frankist movement to revolutionary liberalism and nationalism in general, and I see many parallels in this Christ of Europe concept, especially since Frank taught that Christianity was a kind of transitory stage for the new religion, and this is the basis on which he instructed his followers to get baptized. It also tracks with other nationalist messianic ideas like what we see nowadays with QAnon and the Trump movement. Aside from the common allegation that Mickiewicz was a Freemason, we're going to talk about that later as well. O.A., forgive this pronunciation, Jaslovsky, I believe that's how it's pronounced, also alleged that he was a Frankist convert along with Frédéric Chopin and Julius Sawaki. Julius Sawaki is the poet that he mentioned, who John Paul II quoted. Also worth mentioning that similar to how Andrzej Toyansky believed Napoleon would have an eschatological role, there's evidence that some Frankists believed Napoleon to have been a messiah. Okay, so kind of keep all that in the background here. What I want to do now, if I'm assuming that most people watching this have some familiarity with Jacob Frank and the Frankist sect. But what I'm going to kind of do is just give a little bit of introduction for anyone who's not familiar with this at all, or not really too familiar with Frankism. And I encourage you to kind of do additional research. This is not going to be in depth at all. And there's plenty of good materials out there, especially nowadays about Frankism. But I'm just going to kind of give a glance. I have an article here from the 1908 Jewish Encyclopedia, written by Herman Rosenthal, who I think was an American Jew. And this is very surface level. Frankism is a very, very deep rabbit hole. But yeah, this is just kind of an introductory narrative. Okay, the Frankists were a semi-Christian religious organization that came into being among the Jews of Poland in about the middle of the 18th century. This organization was the ultimate result of two causes. One, the Messianic movement, which agitated the Jewish world after the appearance of the Shabbatai Zvi. I'm gonna pronounce his name Zevi here because it just kind of makes it easier with the spelling in this article. The pseudo Messiah from Smyrna, which is in modern day Turkey, and which degenerated later into religious mysticism, and two, the social and economic upheaval in the life of the Polish Jewry. The spread of the Messianic movement from 1660 to 70 occurred in the period following the harrying and killing of the Jews in the days of the Bogdan Chmielniki. Hundreds of ruined communities in which almost every family mourned and its martyred dead awaited aid from heaven. They were inclined to see in the Ukraine massacres the pre-Messianic sufferings, and in Shabbatai Zevi the Messiah, the coming Messiah deliverer. The fall of the false Messiah and his conversion to Mohammedanism estranged him from many of his followers, but among the more uncultured portion of the Jewish people, the belief in the mystic mission of the Shabbatai persisted for a long time. Having lost its political significance, Messianism at the end of the 17th century assumed a mystical coloring, and the open popular movement was transformed into a secret sectarian cult. A half-Jewish, half-Mohammedan sect of Shabbatians was established in Turkey. In Poland, and particularly in Podolia and Galicia, there were formed numerous secret societies of Shabbatians known among the people as Shabbati Zebyists, or Shebs, according to the Western pronunciation of Shabbatai. In expectation of the great Messianic revolution, the members of these secret societies threw off the burden of strict Jewish dogma and discarded many religious laws and customs. The mystical cult of the Shebs included the elements of both asceticism and sensuality. Some did penance for their sins, subjected themselves to self-inflicted torture, and mourned for Zion. Others disregarded the strict rules of chastity characteristic of Judaism, and at times gave themselves over to licentiousness. The Polish rabbis attempted the extermination of the Shabbatian heresy in the Assembly of Lemberg in 1722 and elsewhere, but could not fully succeed, as it was kept alive mostly in secret circles which had something akin to a Masonic organization. The Shabbatian heresy. The spread of mysticism was favored by the distressing socio-economic condition of the Jews in Podolia and Galicia during the first half of the 18th century, when Poland was falling into decay, and the Haidamach movements destroyed in many Jewish centers security of person and property. The resulting decline of the rabbinical schools and of mental activity was on the whole favorable to the growth of mystical doctrine, which among the masses assumed at times the most monstrous forms. From among these secret circles of Shabbatians came the founder of the Frankist sect, Jacob Frank, born in Podolia about 1726. His father was expelled from the community for belonging to the secret society of Zebyists, and moved to Wallachia, where the influence of the Turkish Shabbatians was strongly felt. While still a schoolboy, Frank displayed an aversion to Jewish learning founded on the Talmud, and afterward often styled himself a plain man or an untutored man. In the capacity of a traveling merchant, he often entered Turkey. There he was named Frank, a name generally given in the East to a European, and there he lived in the centers of contemporary Shabbatianism, Salonika and Smyrna. In the beginning of the 5th decade of the 18th century, he became intimate with the leaders of the sect and adopted its semi-Mohammedan cult. In 1755, he appeared in Podolia, and gathering about him a group of local sectarians, began to preach to them the revelations which were communicated to him by the successors of the false Messiah in Salonika. In their secret gatherings was performed under the leadership of Frank in their secret gatherings was performed under the leadership of Frank much that was directly opposed to the religious ethical conceptions of the Orthodox Jews. One of these gatherings ending in a scandal, the attention of the rabbis was drawn to the new propaganda. They're referring, I think, to a particular event, and maybe I shouldn't even say it. I mean, if you look more into this, you'll know what they're talking about concerning a bride. As a foreigner, Frank was obliged to leave Podolia, while his followers were given over to the rabbis and the Kahal authorities in 1756. At the rabbinical court held in the village of Satanov, many of the sectarians confessed to having broken the fundamental laws of morality, and women confessed to having violated their marriage vows and told of sexual looseness which reigned in the sect under the guise of mystical symbolism. Here's a picture of Frank. The anti-Talmudists. As a result of these disclosures, the Congress of Rabbis in Brody proclaimed a strong harem, or excommunication, against all impenitent heretics, and made it obligatory upon every pious Jew to search them out and expose them. I believe this is also, I can't remember if this was the specific event wherein there was a mandate that everyone I think you have to be 40 to study the Kabbalah. I think that this was the event that spurned that ordinance, but I'm not entirely sure. The persecuted sectarians informed the Catholic bishop of Kamenets-Podolsk that the Jewish sect to which they belonged rejected the Talmud and recognized only the sacred book of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, which they alleged omitted the truth of the doctrine of the Trinity. They claimed that they regarded the Messiah deliverer as one of the three divinities, but failed to state that by the Messiah they meant Shabbatai Zevi. The bishop took seriously the anti-Talmudists or Zoharists, as the sectarians began to style themselves, and in 1757 arranged a religious discussion between them and the rabbis. The anti-Talmudists presented their equivocal theses, to which the rabbis gave a very lukewarm and unwilling reply for fear of offending the church dignitaries who were present. The bishop decided that the Talmudists had been vanquished and ordered them to pay a fine to their opponents and to burn all copies of the Talmud in the bishopric of Podolia. After the death of their patron, the bishop, the sectarians were subjected to severe persecution by the rabbis and the heads of the Kahals. The anti-Talmudists succeeded in obtaining from Augustus III, 1733 to 63, an edict guaranteeing them safety, but even this did not avail to free them from the unfortunate position of men who, having parted from their co-religionists, had not yet succeeded in identifying themselves with another faith. At this critical moment, Jacob Frank came to Podolia with a new project. He posed as a direct successor of Shabbatai Zevi and assured his adherents that he had received revelations from heaven. These revelations called for the conversion of Frank and his followers to the Christian religion, which was to be a visible transition stage to the future Messianic religion. In 1759, negotiations looking toward the conversion of the Frankists to Christianity were being actively carried on with the higher representatives of the Polish Church. At the same time, the Frankists tried to secure another discussion with the rabbis. The Polish primate Lubensky and the papal nuncio Nicholas Serra were suspicious of the aspirations of the Frankists, but at the instance of the administrator of the bishopric of Lemberg, the canon Mikulski, the discussion was arranged. It was held in Lemberg and was presided over by Mikulski. Baptism of the Franks. This time the rabbis energetically repulsed their opponents. After the discussion, the Frankists were requested to demonstrate in practice their adherence to Christianity in 1759. Jacob Frank, who had then arrived in Lemberg, encouraged his followers to take the decisive step. The baptism of the Frankists was celebrated with great solemnity in the churches of Lemberg, members of the Polish nobility acting as godparents. The neophytes adopted the names of their godfathers and godmothers, so they're adopting the surnames of the Polish nobility and gentry, which is important to note. Yada yada yada. Yeah, the neophytes adopted the names of their godfathers and godmothers and ultimately joined the ranks of the Polish nobility. In the course of 1 year, more than 500 persons were converted to Christianity in Lemberg, among them the intimates of the disciples of Frank. Frank himself was baptized in Warsaw, Augustus III acting as godfather in 1759. The baptismal name of Frank was Joseph. The insincerity of the Frankists soon became apparent, however, for they continued to intermarry only among themselves and held Frank in reverence, calling him the Holy Master. And it was also discovered that Frank endeavored to pass as a Mohammedan in Turkey. He was therefore arrested in Warsaw in 1760 and delivered to the church's tribunal on the charge of feigned conversion to Catholicism and the spreading of a pernicious heresy. The church tribunal convicted Frank as a teacher of heresy and imprisoned him in a monastery in the fortress of Częstochow so that he might not communicate with his adherents. Frank in prison. Frank's imprisonment lasted 13 years, yet it only tended to increase his influence with the sect by surrounding him with the aureola of martyrdom. Many of the Frankists established themselves in the vicinity of Częstochow and kept up constant communication with the Holy Master, often gaining access to the fortress. Frank inspired his followers by mystical speeches and epistles in which he stated that salvation could be gained only through the religion of Edom, or Dat, law, by which he meant a strange mixture of Christian and Shabbatian beliefs. After the first partition of Poland, Frank was released from captivity by the Russian general Bibikov, who had occupied Częstochow in 1772. Until 1786, Frank lived in a Moravian town of Brunn and was surrounded by a numerous suite of sectarians and pilgrims who came from Poland. For many of the pilgrims, there was great attraction in the person of Eve, the beautiful daughter of Frank, who at this time began to play an important role in the organization of the sect. Quick note before continuing, I believe some of the Frankists also converted to the Moravian Brotherhood, or the Unitarian Moravian branch or sect, in addition to Catholicism, but it was like a very small amount of Frankists. Accompanied by his daughter, Frank repeatedly traveled to Vienna and succeeded in gaining the favor of the court. The pious Maria Theresa regarded him as a disseminator of Christianity among the Jews, and it is even said that Joseph II was favorably inclined to the young Eve Frank. Joseph II was also super friendly with Freemasonry, although I don't think he actually ever joined. Or at least there's no evidence that he did. Ultimately, the sectarian plans of Frank were also out there, were found out here also. He was obliged to leave Austria and move with his daughter and his suite to Offenbach, a small German town. Here he assumed the title of Baron of Offenbach, and lived as a wealthy nobleman, receiving money from his Polish and Moravian adherents, who made frequent pilgrimages to Offenbach. On the death of Frank in 1791, Eve became the holy mistress and the leader of the sect. As time went on, the number of pilgrims and the supply of money constantly diminished, while Eve continued to live in her accustomed luxury. She finally became involved in debt and died neglected in 1816. Eve was also pronounced by Frank as a Messiah and as an incarnation of the Virgin Mary, which he, in his sort of thought, or at least this is a common theme with him, he kind of identifies the Virgin Mary with Shekinah. So and this is kind of important to note. I'll revisit this later, but just keep in mind, Eve is identified with the Virgin Mary, and there's kind of a pseudo cult of Mary that builds around her, and that even lasts like until from what I understand, until the early 20th century. So she does have like still some devoted followers throughout the 19th century, and it's a kind of cult of Mary sort of dynamic. The Frankists scattered in Poland and Bohemia. The Frankists scattered in Poland and Bohemia and were gradually transformed from feigned to real Catholics, citation needed, and their descendants merged into the surrounding Christian population. The sect disappeared without leaving any traces in Judaism because it had no positive religious ethical foundation. Attempts to formulate the teachings of Frank upon the basis of a collection of his utterances preserved in manuscript Biblia Balamuntna have so far failed. Again, keep in mind this article was written in 1908. There is no doubt, however, that Frankism consisted in a negation of the religious as well as the ethical discipline of Judaism. Quote, I came to free the world from the laws and the regulations which have hitherto existed, end quote, says Frank in one of his characteristic utterances. In this movement, visionary mysticism degenerated into mystification and Messianism into an endeavor to get rid of the Jewish sorrow by renouncing Judaism. Okay. So, kind of important note on that last paragraph, and I'm going to actually play something which will elaborate on a point here. In this kind of Shabbatian, Frankist, antinomian current, in this particular sort of interpretation of Lurianic Kabbalah, you get this recurring idea of redemption through sin, or the fulfillment of the law lies in the transgression of the law, and this idea, I think, could be said to exist in the Chabad movement, or at least in some currents of the Chabad movement and some currents of Hasidism. And so it is relevant to today in that respect. I'm going to talk about other ways in which this weird little piece of Jewish history is significant. But I want to now turn to a brief clip from an interview with Rabbi Dr. J. Michelson. He is I guess I don't even know how to describe him. He is a gay rabbi, very interested in Frankism, wrote a book on Frankism that I was considering picking up. And I don't really know that he is affiliated with any particular, if he's affiliated with Reform Judaism or like what kind of characters he's affiliated with. He seems kind of pretty independent, so it's kind of difficult to categorize him. But yeah, he's definitely influenced by this sort of Sabbatean Frankist kind of mystical direction, and I think he summarizes Frankism pretty succinctly in this, or at least the sort of spiritual essence of Frankism pretty succinctly in this clip that I'm about to play.
He then has a whole other career. which is the focus of my book and the kind of the oral teachings of his that were recorded mostly in the year 1784. These teachings were often regarded as kind of garbage by scholars. Like, he had nothing really to say. This guy was a con man, kind of a 18th century cult leader, to use an anachronism. But I try to show in my book that actually, while he was certainly a devious and manipulative and often violent individual, no paragon of virtue, he also developed this remarkable theology, bringing together a kind of almost liberal or rationalistic critique of religious law. Religious law doesn't work. You shouldn't listen to it. It's garbage. It's holding you back from flourishing and so forth, with a whole esoteric myth, a kind of Gnostic esotericism that the whole world is the enemy of the true God, as Frank says at one point. And the goal is to, by gaining esoteric gnosis, eventually learn to transcend death and live forever. This is pretty wild stuff for a ex-Jew in the 1780s, 1790s to be talking about. And yet it was recorded in these teachings. Frank did not live forever. His movement ended when he died in the 1790s. His daughter carried it on for another 20 years, but it quickly withered. And yet even there, I say, and talk about in the book, Frank and his movement ended, but he prefigured trends that would later become quite dominant, not just in Judaism, but in Western religion, such as that critique of religious authority, religious law, and some of his other innovations. That is my 5 minutes.
Okay, that kind of summarizes, the point that I made at the end of that paragraph as well. Now, there's another sort of interesting thing that you get when looking at his, he mentioned his recorded oral teachings, and it's Polish nationalism, or this attachment to the land of Poland, the significance of the land of Poland in his writings. So I have here the words of the Lord Jacob Frank. This is an edition translated and annotated by Harris Lenowitz. And there's a few passages I want to read here which mention Poland. And keep in mind, this is being recorded in 1784, so this is after the first partition of Poland, which I think occurred about a decade earlier, wherein Austria, Prussia, and Russia basically just kind of ate their own kind of parts of Poland. And also keep in mind what was mentioned in the article that I read about him in that Jewish encyclopedia. This idea of the religion of Edom. He doesn't just associate Edom with Christianity; he also associates it with Poland, and really, Poland with Christianity. So. Let me read it. This is section 60 or paragraph 67. When God will grant me rest, then I will reveal to you a certain word from which you will know and will see perfectly the meaning of my stay in prison and of my present stay in Brunn, my status and position and your position to this point. You will be greatly sorry on account of your deeds, because you will know what you have lost, and you will know perfectly the story of Jacob and Esau and Laban, and then at that time you will need no scolding, because this very thing will scold you and will lead you step after step behind me. Then you will know what has happened and will happen in Poland. There's actually there's a footnote here saying that this is a reference to the dismemberment of Poland, or the partitioning of Poland. You will also know why they display the Pope in Rome, and whoever will attain the spirit of wisdom will be able to know the other thing which will occur in Edom, meaning Poland. But about the father of Edom, neither ability nor thought nor understanding can grasp what happens there. You will also know why I sent you flying from one place to another, and why I ordered the whole company to come to Czestochowa. And since you have been there, although you have seen nothing, not the power nor that treading, you will still be able to follow me on from that place. Then you will know why Rachel died on the road, and what were those household gods. Okay, and then these two paragraphs are pretty explicit as well. 84 and 85. When Jacob was wrestling with the angel asked him, "Jacob, where are you going?" He answered him, "Into the field of Edom, that is, to Poland." He said to him, "And do you know, Jacob, what there is to do in Poland? Well then, such and such is to be done there." At that time a great fear fell on Jacob, and he fainted. Thereupon the angel said to him, "Lau yakor aud shimcho janko ki im Israel." Not Jacob is your name, but Israel. Another Jacob will come and carry out these deeds in Poland. Referring to himself. Or at least that's what seems to be the inference there. 85. You must know and understand that every kingdom is maintained by some powerful thing. The proof of this is all the Israelites had their power through maintaining the temple, and as soon as the temple was destroyed, they were immediately exiled. And so it is in Poland. The great power of their guard was in Czestochowa because of that great guardian who serves hidden in it as it stands. The servant girl has inherited the property of her mistress. And there's a footnote here. It says, Proverbs 30:23. Generally, the Zohar takes this passage as referring to the replacement of the Shekinah by Lilith, light by darkness. The servant girl has inherited the property of her mistress, and as soon as we came there, then the country was divided, and the words of Balaam were fulfilled. Vehoyo Edom Eresho. Edom will be passed on as an inheritance, which has not yet happened since Poland became Poland. If you had been whole, then it would have happened to it as it happened to the temple. And now you have dropped the letter Aleph and begun with the letter Bes. Even the newcomers from faraway countries, even if they were whole, I would nevertheless be unable to reveal it to them because they were not together with me from the start. Okay, so clearly some kind of significance of the land of Poland. He's identifying it with Christianity itself and with Edom. And of course, he views Edom and Christianity themselves as transitory, as transitory stages for bringing about, or for places for being present within the ushering of the new messianic religion, or the religion to come. So ideas of national messianism, ideas of kind of creation of new religion through negation of the old, and so on. Finally, I want to, before kind of laying out the cast of relevant characters to this particular question, I wanted to play this other clip. This is another interview with Jay Michelson. And this is with, I want to play this part where Professor Naomi Seidman is speaking. She has an Hasidic background, New York Hasidic background. This is from the channel, Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies? Yeah, LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion, I think Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. And I was actually looking at this the other day, and saw this, watched a few minutes of that, and almost had to throw up. So if you want to know what might be in store in the future, check this video about queering Lent, or check out this video about queering Lent, or don't. But yeah, I wanted to play this clip really quickly because before kind of going into the cast of characters, I want to reflect briefly on the importance of noticing a difference or making a distinction between lines of influence and, things developing parallelly, and, just kind of drinking from the same well. And I think she's kind of speaking to the point of drinking from the same well. Hasidism and Sabbatianism are kind of both drinking from this well of Lurianic Kabbalah.
And maybe I could just say one little anecdote, which is that I grew up hearing about Jacob Frank, which is not what you would expect from a girl in a Hasidic home in Brooklyn. And that's because a family story was that when my father was 13 years old, he was poking around in the town archives and he found some kind of letter about Jacob Frank. And my father grew up in the town of Buchach, which apparently was a center of Frankist thought. And he sent a copy of this document to Mayor Balaban, the first Jewish studies professor in Poland. And Balaban wrote him back a letter saying, "Dear Professor Seidman," not understanding he was corresponding with the 13-year-old. And later, my father went and studied with Balaban. So this was a story I grew up on, and it fascinated me. And I'm not surprised that a 13-year-old Hasidic boy would be fascinated by Jacob Frank, right? There are these moments in history that, as if they reach out of the past and they grab us by the lapel. And Jacob Frank is one of those moments, or the story of Jacob Frank is one of those moments that has a kind of power to transcend its incredibly weird, particular, local, eccentric details and speak to us as if we're right there. Now, my question is, to what extent, and I think that...
Okay, yeah, that's good enough. So she's making kind of a good point there that, like, in finding meaning in certain historical figures, there can be kind of, and I think actually she says something later about creative misinterpretation or creative misrepresentation, or just kind of making use of them for one's own purposes. We see this all the time in, like, for instance, a figure like Nietzsche. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. I'm not really interested in, I mean, I guess it is of importance when people kind of are more so drawing from a mythology of a figure rather than things that are more based in factual, demonstrable, forensic history. But I'm more so kind of interested in, like, really doing the historical legwork and determining, are there lines of influence? Are there actually Frankist lines of influence, like direct influence, transmittive influence in Polish Messianism and Romanticism? And I think before I get into laying out the cast of characters, I mentioned in my comment earlier this book, From Frankism to Jacobinism. It's by the one of the 20th century's most reputable scholars of Kabbalah, Gershom Scholem, and it's extremely interesting. I have another book here from Scholem that I read a few years ago, and recently I've been revisiting it. This is just entitled Kabbalah, and it's a very good kind of introduction to the field. So if you're interested in these things, I would recommend checking that out as well. But I'm going to read some of the second chapter from this book. This is, I mentioned earlier, this was translated into English. It was originally written in Hebrew and then translated into French. And then the YouTube user Didymus Sumidid translated it into English from French a few years ago. So it has not been available in English until a few years ago. And it's a pretty relevant tale. It basically, I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into it, of course, but it discusses this character, Moses Dobrushka, who was, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, a relative of Jacob Frank. And his kind of, from Frankism to Jacobinism, right? His kind of journey from Frankism, from his conversion, where he takes on a different name, Franz Schenfeld, which is what I'm going to be. The passage that I'm going to be reading will refer to him as that, and then he becomes very predominant in the Asiatic Brethren, and brings, Freemasonry at that time and secret societies at that time were more kind of rationalistic and deistic and more influenced by kind of English common sense sort of thought, or Enlightenment kind of thought, at least at that time. And what we see kind of in the Revolutionary era is more and more gravitation toward mystical thought and Kabbalistic thought. It's not that these elements weren't already present, but we see a greater kind of gravitation toward these elements. And someone like Moses Dobruschka, for instance, is pretty instrumental in that change, because he has the Jewish background, he has the learned background, he has background in Kabbalistic exegesis. So he's able to kind of help move from like a more quasi-Kabbalistic gnosis into something that actually has some connection to Jewry. And then, of course, Moses Dobruschka, later Franz Schenfeld, later Junius Frey, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, he becomes involved in the Jacobin Club, and he finally meets his fate in the Reign of Terror, I believe due to, if I'm remembering correctly, due to his connections to the East India Trading Company, or it might have been the connections of his brother. But in any case, just going to read a few pages from this second chapter. We do not know exactly what Schenfeld's, that is Moses Dobruschka, financial enterprises were in the 10 years following his conversion to Christianity. He himself complains about his many activities that do not allow him the time to indulge in literature as he would like, but without specifying which ones. Furthermore, we know that during those years he also pursued more secret activities. Undoubtedly, he devoted a large part of his time for a few years to activities in organizations affiliated to the Freemasonic movement. In addition to the ordinary English-inspired Masonic societies, which also existed in the German Empire and enjoyed broad support from many people of princely and aristocratic backgrounds, including the Emperor Joseph II, this period saw the blossoming of Masonic orders with esoteric tendencies with a particular structure. The main difference between ordinary Freemasonry and these new offshoots was ideological. While the doctrine of the former was rather of Christian inspiration and rationalist or even deist, the latter had mystical and initiatory tendencies. They gave prominence to the Christian theosophy professed by Jacob Böhme and Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, to alchemy, and to a certain extent to magical practices. These various elements had crystallized in societies that considered themselves to be the continuators of the fictitious order called the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. Citation needed on that one, in terms of it being fictitious. So-called in the 17th century, and which took that name. These groups attracted a significant number of nobles and high officials who oscillated between rationalism and mysticism and sometimes tried to synthesize these two trends. It is in the no man's land between these two tendencies that the Order of the Asiatic Brothers was born, resulting from a reorganization of the Knights of the True Light, Ritter vom Freien Licht. Sometime before 1780, Schenfeld had joined the ordinary Freemasons, as had some of his kinfolk and some members of the Jewish and Frankist milieu in the wealthy families of Austria. But when he joined the two societies mentioned above, 1781 to 83, he identified with their mystical tendencies. The basic literature of these societies was distinguished by borrowing from Judaism in a general way, extracts of the ritual prayers in particular. Among the Knights, and even more so among the Asiatic brothers, we find Kabbalistic elements. Not pseudo-Kabbalistic, as in other brotherhoods of this kind, but authentic formulas taken from the Book of the Zohar, reflections on the Tetragrammaton letters in the Pardes Ramonium book, the Kabbalistic Moses Cordovero, and even long speculations on creation quoted alongside the teachings of Christian theosophists. It must therefore be recognized that this is a unique institution in the history of mystical Masonry, since it marries the Christian and Jewish elements even before the open admission of Jewish members, with the Jewish elements being particularly prominent. In his memoirs, Franz J. Molitor, 1779 to 1860, who had reliable sources concerning the character of this institution, writes that in the days when the Asiatic Brethren worked in Vienna, the Jewish aspect of the society became more visible. It was only due to the transfer of their center to North Germany, 1786, that the Christian tendency became dominant. However, we see that in the group of the main founders of the Order of the Asiatic Brothers, the first place went to Franz Thomas von Schoenfeld, our main character, along with a Bavarian noble named Hans Heinrich von Ecker und Eckhoffen, 1750 to 1790, and the Capuchin brother Bischoff, died in January 1786. In addition, there were a certain number of St. Martin's faithful belonging to the nobility and the Austrian civil service. The Frankist, the extravagant Catholic monk, he had long stays in the East and had, it seems, a lot of sympathy for the Sabbateans he met, and the adventurer from the circle of Gold und Rosenkreuzer, the Order of Gold and Rosicrucians, got along very well because of their shared syncretistic tendencies. The participation of Schoenfeld in these activities is no longer in doubt, according to the results of our research in the archives of the Freemasons at Copenhagen and in the corresponding archives at The Hague. We once thought that the Jewish and Kabbalistic elements of these brotherhoods should rather be attributed to Ephraim Joseph Hirschfeld. Meanwhile, my research in Hamburg and the discovery made by Jacob Katz in the Hague of news sources published or used in part in his 1970 book Jews and Freemasons in Europe have proved Schoenfeld's preponderant role compared to Hirschfeld during the years 1781 to 84. The leading role played by Schoenfeld is confirmed by the testimony of the characters most concerned in this case. Prince Charles of Hesse, the supreme leader of the esoteric Masonry organizations in Germany, who also directed the order from August 1786, declared at the end of his days Schoenfeld was, with Eckhoffen, one of the first militants in the Asiatic order. The first instructions in the Asiatics doctrine were probably elaborated by three persons, Bischoff, Ecker, von Eckhoffen, and Schoenfeld. It was especially from this third one and not from Hirschfeld, as we once supposed, and as suggested by some secondary sources of the history of the order, that the Kabbalistic elements originate. We will not dwell on the problem of the Jews within the Asiatic order, which was the first esoteric community to open its ranks to the Jews. Some of the most important of the court Jews of the time affiliated with it, as well as some of the early Maskalim. This fact has been proven by the research of Jacob Katz and myself. When in 1784, the precise date is not absolutely certain, Hirschfeld joined the order, the basic texts of the doctrine of the Asiatics already existed, with all their Kabbalistic elements. It was not Hirschfeld, but others who determined the basic orientation of the Brotherhood, although in the years to come he composed long comments on the subject, and a considerable part of which has reached us. Jacob Katz discovered a formal testimony by Hirschfeld about Schoenfeld's contribution to the development of these fundamental texts. Toward the end of his life, Hirschfeld told Christian scholar Franz Joseph Molitor, who became a specialist in Kabbalah, his memories of the Asiatics, and he wrote them in two versions dating back to 1820 and 29 respectively. It is true that because of his old age, Hirschfeld's memory betrays him on certain details and his remarks are sometimes biased, but in general the information provided is accurate. Hirschfeld was well acquainted with Schoenfeld and therefore knew how well Schoenfeld understood Hebrew and Chaldean or Aramaic, namely the language of the Zohar and Kabbalah, and that he was one of the most important personalities in the order. Similarly, he was not unaware of his links with the leaders of the sect of Shabbatai Zevi, but he confused the family of Jacob Frank with that of Rabbi Jonathan Iveschutz, again for obvious reasons, as we shall see. According to him, Schoenfeld was, quote, the grandson of the famous Rabbi Ibeschutz of Hamburg, member of the sect of Shabbatai Zevi. Schoenfeld, who had converted, became court librarian at Vienna and possessed many rare manuscripts which he had inherited from his grandfather, from which he drew the instructions for the Brothers of the Light, Instructionem for neophytes. Thanks to his origins and knowledge from manuscripts, he remained in touch with the Shabbatai Zevi sect, which had many supporters in Poland, Hungary, and Bohemia, end quote. The last sentence suggests, of course, the connivance of Schoenfeld with the Frankists, who were not yet known by this name in the time of Hirschfeld, and which was called simply the sect of Shabbatai Zevi. The error about Ibeschutz is easily explained. The manuscripts mentioned, which Schoenfeld used as a basis for writing the text of the order, were Shabbatian Kabbalistic books attributed to Ibeschutz by the Sabbatean tradition of Moravia. These texts include mainly the book Va'avo Hayom El Ha'ayin, already mentioned. Hirschfeld had learned, no doubt, from Schoenfeld's own mouth that excerpts from this book had been transposed into constituent texts of the Asiatic order. This is confirmed by an analysis of these texts, most of which was published in Berlin in 1803. Some passages are only the translation, incidentally, of excellent quality, of the first pages of the Shabbatian manuscript, obviously without any reference to the source. In the original Hebrew, these pages, preserved in multiple copies, are in a difficult style, and the thoughts expressed are rather dense and entirely focused on the Sabbatean theology of Nathan of Gaza, who was the prophet that basically told Shabbatai Zevi that he was the Messiah, presented in a new formulation. I'm just going to kind of leave it there because it kind of gets mired into some details, but the important aspect of this to keep in mind here is that this Moses Dobrushka character is pretty instrumental in the transformation of this secret society, these constellations of secret societies, into having a more robust Kabbalistic rule. And something that a kind of side quest here is, what kind of influence did the Frankist sect exert on Polish Freemasonry, which was not as prominent yet, it was not as prominent at that time, and it would later be suppressed, particularly by Russia, but the Holy Alliance in general. But there is this kind of interesting coincidence of Polish militarism, nationalism. Jacob Frank talks about, he recommends joining the military. I believe several of the brothers of Moses Dobrushka, if I remember correctly, go and join the military. And the kind of Freemasonic connection here is that maybe an inquiry into that is opened up by an analysis of this figure, Andrzej Makaronowski, who was a politician and general of the Polish army. He was the first Polish Mason and founder of the first Masonic lodge in Poland, which opened in 1742 in Wisniawicz. He subsequently founded another lodge in 1744 in Warsaw. He was made Knight of the Order of the White Eagle in 1776 and served as a marshal of the Sejm, or Sem, the Sejm Republic of Poland, from August 26th to October 31st in 1776 in Warsaw. So there is a connection here between Masonry and the military, and there's this interesting connection between the Frankist sect and Polish nationalism and entrance into the military. So I do wonder, is there any kind of influence of Frankish, Sabbatean, antinomian kind of mystical ideas on the lodge at this time? I presume that they're still kind of in this early Enlightenment stage when they're being formed. The Grand Orient of Poland doesn't come around until the 1770s, I believe, after a patent is granted from the Grand Orient of France. So it's maybe the ideas come through the Grand Orient of France and into the Grand Orient of Poland. I don't know. That would be kind of weird if you have this, like, let's go down to France and then back to Poland. But yeah, I mean, it seems like there's probably some kind of, I mean, if not an overlap, there's got to be some kind of. I just find it very unlikely that there aren't Frankists involved in Polish Freemasonry and in the kind of changing of the sea of ideas in Polish Freemasonry, as we've demonstrated in French Freemasonic or secret societies. Okay, so kind of laying out the cast of characters. Let's just go to Adam Mickiewicz. Gosh, if you're of Polish descent, please forgive me. I'm gonna mispronounce everything here. So this was kind of the principal guy that that first video that I showed mentioned, and he seems to be kind of the center of all of this romantic cultural movement. He's most well known for this drama Forefathers Eve, in which this Christ of Europe concept seems pretty preponderant. And he, as I mentioned before in that comment, the Russian privy official made the allegation that he was a Frankist. The sort of scholarly consensus is that that's improbable, and I think the reason that that's generally cited to be the case is because he comes from a poorer background on his mother's side. However, he does marry a woman of Frankist and notable Frankist descent, Celina Szymanowska, who is the daughter of Maria Szymanowska. Now I'm going to talk about her really quickly before returning to Celina. Maria Szymanowska is kind of like, we have in the American context this Jewish American princess sort of archetype, and she seems to be something sort of analogous to that, at least in her own social context. She is, as it says down here, she was born in Warsaw on the 14th of December 1789 into a prosperous Polish family with Frankist Jewish roots, one of her ancestors being Solomon ben Elijah, the personal assistant of Jacob Frank. This would be another interesting person to look into. So she's coming from this affluent Frankist background. She is a She's a socialite. She is an internationally renowned virtuoso pianist and composer. And many people see her as kind of a forerunner to Frédéric Chopin, who is also alleged in that comment earlier to be a Frankist, and I'm going to talk about Chopin later. And when she moves to St. Petersburg, presumably in connection to the Great Emigration, or perhaps prior, she runs this salon, and as you can see, there's a section about her reputation. There's much more on all of these people. There's so much more information on the Polish Wikipedia pages. I haven't gotten around to like translating all of them or setting up an automatic translation feature here. But this is a good little blurb. Because of her stature as a performance artist and because of her salon, Zimanowska developed a strong web of connections with some of the most notable composers, performing musicians, and poets of her day, including Ludwig van Beethoven, Luigi Cherubini, Chopin, Rossini, Hummel, John Field, Pierre Belot, Giuditta Pasta, Goethe, and Miskowitz. And this is actually a pretty interesting little detail here. Goethe is rumored to have fallen deeply in love with her. And, again, she is this kind of very beautiful socialite person. I think there's more portraits on her Polish Wikipedia page. This very beautiful socialite person. This painting, by the way, I believe was done by a prominent Freemason. Alexander Kokular. Interesting thing about paintings of Jewish personnel, which I'll actually touch upon when discussing Chopin, is they tend to play down the nose. Or at least Jewish characteristics in general. So this is, this mother of the wife of our main character, the mother-in-law of our main character, is this Frankist descended, prominent, affluent Frankist descended European socialite, who is this, kind of central node, perhaps, in a lot of European intelligentsia. She also has another daughter named Helena, who marries a Polish lawyer, Franciszek Maluski, who I will mention again later, in connection to a secret society that Adam Miskowitz belonged to. But beside that, she's running the salon, and the salons in Europe, and I think perhaps especially in the Holy Alliance affiliated territories, these could be said to act as sort of surrogate centers of Freemasonic activity, because in the early 19th century, because late 18th and early 19th century, because Freemasonry is being suppressed. These are kind of safer places to gather and discuss things than places that explicitly denote themselves as lodges. But what we'll also see is that in the early 19th century, there's a lot of different secret societies, cultural, literary societies that get formed that are kind of perhaps also acting as surrogate Freemasonic societies, and even emulate Freemasonic kind of structure. Okay, so returning to her daughter Selina Zimanowska, the wife of Adam Mickiewicz, this is a very interesting character. Again, so descended of prominent Frankists, married to a man who is alleged to be a Frankist, but we can't really know for sure. But again, I'm going to touch on that later. Let me just read some of this really quickly. Selina roused the dislike of other Polish emigres, including the Romantic poet Zygmunt Krasinski. She was accused of extravagance, poor cooking skills, and a desire to dominate her husband, and mental instability. A quick note on Krasinski. He's another character affiliated with this Romantic movement, and perhaps even sort of makes use of this Christ of Europe concept in his works. But he seems to be of a much more conservative and, anti-Semitic bend. And I've read elsewhere that part of the reason that Krasinski disliked Selina is because of her her well-known Frankist roots. And Krasinski's major work, the Undivine Comedy, I guess is considered to be, very, very anti-Semitic, very anti-liberal. Just from glancing over his materials and his kind of way of looking at the world and his life, he seems very similar to a kind of almost analogous to a Joseph de Maistre kind of figure, very sort of having a sort of providentialist look at the world or view of the world. Anyways, continuing with Selina. In 1838, Selina declared herself a prophet, an incarnation of the Mother of God, and Redeemer of Poland, of Polish emigres, and of the Jews. She also claimed to possess a power to heal, which she said she had successfully applied to the gravely ill Adolf Zaleski. Now, you'll remember, as I mentioned earlier, Eve Frank was said to be an incarnation or a reincarnation of the Virgin Mary. And if you look at that in connection with this broader context of Polish nationalism, for Selina to describe herself as a redeemer of Poland and of Polish emigres and of Jews, that's a very, I think that could definitely be interpreted in a Frankist light. There's before I continue, there was a paper that I downloaded that I have not had a chance to read through yet, but it's entitled Selina Zimanowska as a Frankist by Jadwiga Maurer, and I just kind of glanced over it, and it seems to contain a lot of interesting information about this particular person. And as I kind of get further in my research here, I'll probably make reference to this paper and go more into detail about her particular claims and visions and so on. Okay, for a time, Mickiewicz cared for his wife himself, but marital discord and Selina's mental illness drove him to attempt suicide on 17th or 18th of December 1838 by jumping out a window. When he found that Selina's mental state was getting worse, Mickiewicz had her committed to a mental hospital at Vanves, which is in France, I believe in Paris. Is it in Paris? Or it's a commune. Okay. Yeah, Vanves in France, where she underwent sleep deprivation, cold water, and mental shock therapies. And this is, so in 38, this is after the November uprising and the sort of beginning of the Great Emigration, this huge emigration of the Polish kind of cultural elite, including figures like Mickiewicz and others, and all these other kind of people associated with secret societies there, into other countries, in particular France. Selina was freed from the hospital by Andrzej Tojański, another one of these figures mentioned earlier, as someone who has this vision of the Virgin Mary and the Paraclete. and who forms this, what I'm going to talk about a little bit more later, this, what is it called, the Circle of the Cause of God, which Mickiewicz gets involved in to some degree, as well as other Polish emigres. Selina was freed from the hospital by Andrzej Tojański, who claimed to have miraculously cured her. She believed his assurances that he had regained her mental health, and to the end of her life, she remained under his influence and that of the Circle of God's Cause. Okay. So yeah, this is something that, this is a particular person, and these particular events, I think, are of pertinent interest here in this kind of narrative that I'm trying to establish. I'm going to return to this figure here. Actually, maybe I will first discuss the Philomath Society. So this is a secret society, secret student organization that Mickiewicz and others, I mentioned the son of, so Selina's brother gets involved here, or no, Selina's brother-in-law, I should say, gets involved. And as it kind of points out, its structure was a cross between Freemasonry and a learned society. See, it was divided into two chapters: scientific, mathematic, and literary. The members and of the latter discussed literary works, and the organization aims were self-educational and didactic. However, around 1819 to 20, the members became split on whether the organizations should concentrate on self-education or take a more active role in restoring Poland's independence. And says Mickiewicz in parentheses here. And the restoration of Poland's independence is this constant theme throughout the life of Mickiewicz. Eventually, the second faction gained dominance and new social and political goals emerged. Discussions increasingly turned toward romanticist ideals that were banned by the Russian Empire for their pro-independence currents. History of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was studied, pro-independence works written and circulated, yada, yada, yada. Two closely related groups were formed: the Radiant Association, in 1820, a legal organization created by Thomas Zahn, and disbanded under pressure from university authorities. Thomas Zahn has, I think, previous associations with Freemasonry, particularly through this this society called the Society of Scoundrels. I think that's what it translates to. So yeah, I mean, you're seeing that these organizations kind of fulfill a surrogate Freemasonic role. And the Philaret Association, from the Greek philaretos, lovers of virtue, 1834, a secret organization created by Zahn with the Philomaths after the dissolution of the Radiants. It continued the traditions of the Radiants, but with a much clearer pro-independence goal, and was dedicated to the study of Polish and Lithuanian patriotic literature. It was disbanded in 1823 at the arrest of the Philomaths. One of the founders here says the spirit prevailing in the Philomaths and the Philaret Association was purely national, patriotic, Polish, but free of plots and conspiracies, free of demagogic rants. And this seems to be kind of like a tension in Mickiewicz's life in general. He's more aggressive. He wants to form legions. He's more interested in practical kind of association, and in really establishing independence of, independent Polish nation state. Whereas other kind of people associated with these movements, they're maybe not so interested in this. In 1822, or at least they're not interested in kind of like actively pursuing and organizing. In 1822, the organizations went through some name changes. In 23, the organization was discovered by Russian authorities, led by Nikolai Nikolaevich Novosельtsev. Yeah. Anyways. Let's see, what else we got here? So this is the figure of Miskovitz and kind of his shtick. He gets involved in these different societies. I don't know that he was formally involved in any explicitly Freemasonic society. I mean, they seem to basically have been completely suppressed by the time that he's coming into prominence. He's born basically at the beginning of the 19th century. So, but he does kind of get involved in all these sort of surrogate societies, which, if you are a Catholic, that itself is a very problematic behavior. He also gets involved, I mentioned, with Andrzej Toyansky's circle, the cause of God, or God's cause. And there's not really a lot of information about it in the English language wiki page, but I translated the Polish Wikipedia page for the Circle of God's Cause. So I'm just going to read through this thing this article that I translated with Google. Here's the blurb. Circle of the Cause of God, the organization of the Toyanskists, a moral and religious movement found in Paris on the initiative of Andrzej Toyansky on June 1st, 1842, operating until 78. The Toyanskists believed in the coming of a new era, bringing closer the coming of the kingdom of God on earth, the important role of the Polish nation in this historical process, and they also criticized institutionalized religious forms. So those are like all marks of Frankism there. Coming of a new era, a new religion, bringing closer the coming of the kingdom of God on earth, the important role of the nation of Poland, Polish nationalism, and the kind of anti-clerical, really, I mean, you could just say antinomian in the case of Frank, but just taking more the form of anti-clericalism in the Toyanskist movement. Also, in addition to this, they were convinced that every person had hidden absolute knowledge inside them, given to them by God. So also this sort of gnosis that is prominent in Lurianic Kabbalah in general, but has a particular meaning in Frankism as well. Many representatives of Polish emigration belonged to the circle, including Adam Miskovitz, Julius Slowacki, Michael Schweitzer, and Sorin Gosistinski. I'm really sorry if any of you are Polish. Okay, activities of the circle. The Divine Cause Circle began to form after Toyansky's speech at the Notre Dame Cathedral on September 27th, 1841, which is pretty amazing that he could be given that kind of platform. I mean, I'm wondering if, like, whoever allowed him to give a speech there, like, knew what his kind of teachings were or whatever, in which he explained the assumption of his philosophy. A speech in which he explained the assumptions of his philosophy. Adam Miskovitz actively participated in the organization of the sect, and its first official meeting took place on June 1st, 1842. Initially, there were 17 people in the circle, but this number began to grow over time. but the organization never had more than 100 members. The philosophy of the Italianskists, based on the belief that the historical moment of that time was a breakthrough for Poland and the world, and that group work could accelerate the arrival of a new era based on fight against evil and religiosity, was gaining popularity among Polish emigrants, discouraged by political powerlessness and eager for a momentous deed. However, it was criticized by both liberal Democrats and conservative church circles. The Italianskists believed that the units gathered in the circle would create the so-called God's troop. Again, keep in mind the Frankist emphasis on militancy, having particular significance in bringing the kingdom of God closer. They also assigned this role to selected nations, including the Polish nation. The organization wanted to reform the Catholic Church, so it tried to introduce secular forms of priesthood called the Rites of the New Order. They tried unsuccessfully to win Pope Gregory XVI to their cause. One of the most active members of the circle, involved in creating rituals and organizing the community, was Miskovitz, called Brother Wissist among Toyen residents. Miskovitz also became the head of the Paris Circle after Toyansky was forced to leave the country on July 19, 1842 by the French authorities. From then on, the founder presented his instructions to Miskovitz and later to Karol Radzicki by letter. During this period, the community turned into a sect. A strict hierarchy was introduced, control over all areas of members' lives, and public confession in the circle. Over time, Miskovitz moved away from Toyansky, discouraged by his reluctance to engage in military action and his growing tyranny, and in April 1846 he left him, founding his own circle. The split in the cause of God also caused the so-called Chadzko Act, read at the meeting on November 29, 1944. It was a letter to Tsar Nicholas I in which the leadership of the circle defined the mutual attitude of Poles and Russians in the spirit of love for one's neighbor, regardless of Polish hatred toward the invaders. This document outraged the gathered people. Julius Słowacki expressed a violent protest, while Colonel Mikolaj Kamienski left the sect. Although Toyansky managed to reintegrate the followers, the role of the circle gradually decreased. The organization did not fall apart after the founder's death in 1878. It continued mainly in Turin, which I think is in northern Italy, where Toyansky had many supporters, even among professors and senators. Okay. So there's some very interesting stuff going on with this guy. I'm kind of interested in what his actual vision of Mary and the Paraclete consisted of, and in general his Mariology, in general his understanding of the Holy Spirit, and how that fits into his broader anti-clerical, Gnostic, somewhat antinomian, immanentist worldview. So that's another kind of area to explore. Now I want to turn to there was this allegation about Chopin. Why did I have this woman's? I can't remember why I had her page pulled up. She's just another one of these kinds of figures that is involved in this movement. Later goes on to influence Polish feminist thought, referred to as the mother of the Great Emigration, friends with Chopin and Miskovitz. Okay, so I don't exactly remember why I had her thing pulled up, but I want to now talk about the origin of this claim about this Russian Privy Council privy officer, I should say, that Chopin and I believe Słowacki and Miskovitz have Frankist origins. So this is an article that was published in 2008 in the Russian cultural magazine called the Russian Globe, and it discusses this in a little bit of detail. So I have translated it here, and I will probably read through most of it. Okay. Maybe I would never have touched on this plot if I had not once seen a rare publication in Polish in the Harvard University Library. Only 2 of the 4 volumes prepared by the author were published in 1938 in Warsaw and were sent from there to Harvard. They did not manage to publish the unique work in full in Poland. The Nazis seized it. The printing houses were destroyed, and the manuscript submitted for typing disappeared. The scientist himself disappeared, most likely died in the Warsaw Ghetto. Later I will name him and tell you what materials he managed to collect. In the meantime, I'll note the information he provided did not appear in any of the biographies of the great composer that I looked at. He's referring to Chopin, even the very voluminous ones. What do we know about Chopin's family tree? In Polish, his name is Frédéric František, and in French, Frédéric François. This discrepancy is explained by the fact that the composer's father was a French emigrant, Nicolas Chopin. Some try to substantiate Nicholas's family connection with a certain Pole named Shop, but they were unsuccessful. It was found out that a native of the Lorraine village, a native of a peasant family, Nicolas Chopin, moved to Poland in 1788, where he settled forever. His only letter to his Lorraine relatives has survived, from which it follows that he left France hoping to evade conscription and succeeded. But a few years later, while in Poland, he joined the rebel army of Tadeusz Kościuszko, and even rose to the rank of officer. The uprising was defeated. Finding himself out of work, Nicholas tried to assimilate into the new environment. He spoke Polish and developed a patriotism that was later inherited by his children. Noticing that French was in great fashion among the Polish gentry, he began teaching it. Among these students was a young aristocrat, later the mistress of Napoleon Bonaparte, Maria Walewskaya. Countess Skarbek visited the house where this girl grew up, and she liked the capable teacher. The mother of 5 children, she offered him the position of tutor. Having agreed to leave Warsaw, Nicholas Chopin found himself in the cozy Zelazowa Wola estate, surrounded by a park where in 1802 he met a girl who was destined to become his wife and mother of a brilliant musician. Her name was Justina I gotta get this right because I'm gonna have to say it a few times. Kizizinowska. That's just how I'm going to say it, Kizizinowska. Here is what the prominent Polish writer Jaroslaw Iwaskiewicz, who published one of the best biographies of Frédéric Chopin, wrote. Quote, certainly one of the important tasks of our Chopinologists will be a detailed study of both the biography and character of the composer's mother, end quote. He pointed out a strange contradiction. Of the composer's entire family, we know the least about his mother, although we should know the most. The mother's influence on Friedrich was obviously the most persistent and most significant. Why, despite the publication of numerous biographical works, has an obvious gap formed and apparently still not been filled? This question will not be easy to answer. Of course, certain information, not only about Friedrich's father, but also about Friedrich's mother, appeared in the press. Justina Krzyzanowska, who was jokingly addressed as Mrs. Majordomo, I don't know, a poor relative in the house of the Countess Skarbek, helped the Countess manage the estate. You could read this in the book Chopin, Curtis International. The years of her life are indicated 1782 to 1861, almost 80 years old, an example of longevity rare not only for that era. However, it was not known, and it is still, in my opinion, unclear where she was born. We do not know who her parents were, that is, the composer's maternal grandfather and grandmother. Historiographers only repeated that Justina came from an impoverished gentry. The girl was distinguished by her musicality, played the piano, and sang pleasantly. It can be considered that she had a musical talent. By the time of her first meeting with her future husband, Nicholas Chopin was 31 years old. A strong masculine character, some noted. According to other recollections, he was thorough and economical, neat and efficient, a good teacher, but without any brilliance. His attitude towards art and music was matter of fact. He played the flute he played the flute a little until his son-child one day took it away and broke it. Later, Nicholas, began to learn the violin, but in no sense can he be called an artistic person. Having received a place where Justina lived, he watched the girl for 4 years before proposing. Modest, delicate, with refined manners, his chosen one was not distinguished by beauty. Her son inherited an aquiline nose from her. So I mentioned earlier about Jewish traits being suppressed through painting, and like the aquiline does not mean what a lot of people think it means. It means something more akin to like a Roman nose, kind of like how my nose is, right? If you look at the daguerreotype of Chopin, and this is why, I mean, just this photo of him has been why I've always thought that he was probably Jewish. You look at this photo of him and his nose, and it does not match with his portraits at all. I don't even know, is this a painting? Yeah, it's got to be a painting. I mean, his nose just does not even look remotely close. I mean, this is when he's younger too, so maybe his physiognomy is more tight, more youthful. But you look at these other paintings of him. This looks like a modern painting based on a photograph. And you do not get the same. You get a more aquiline looking nose. You don't get the same the wideness and the snazziness of it, I guess. So I thought it was strange that they used this term aquiline nose. Oh, whoops, where did I go? Let me close this. All right, not distinguished by her beauty, or not distinguished by beauty, her son inherited an aquiline nose from her, but she attracted her with her charm, or she attracted with her charm and kindness towards people. When Justina got married, she was 24 years old. According to the concepts of that time, the marriage seemed somewhat belated. Nicholas and Justina had 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. The head of the family apparently enjoyed the love of his wife and children, but Yaroslav Ivashkevich believed one cannot escape the impression that in their relationship, respect prevailed over love. Both the wife and children were a little afraid of their father. Remaining an 18th century man in his tastes, he was not averse to change and was able to understand and appreciate his son's musical talent. However, it was not difficult to guess. When the family moved to Warsaw, the boy became famous among the aristocracy, and he was nicknamed the Polish Mozart. Already in his youth, he became a favorite of the international nobility. Emperors and kings applauded him at concerts. Since then, Chopin's star had risen high. It has shone not only for a select few. His fame transcends boundaries. The craving for his music is still strong everywhere, but it has not been completed. how can we more accurately describe it? More of a conversation than a dispute about the ethnic origin of the composer. I'll start with the book of the Israeli historian Saveli Dudakov, The History of a Myth, not because he took sides or assumed the role of arbiter in a genealogical dispute. The reason is different. From the mentioned book, you can learn about one of the primary sources of the version. It turns out that in 1883, issue 14 of the magazine Russian Antiquity published the memoirs of an influential official of the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, Privy Councillor O.A. Przezslavsky. The author of these memoirs presented readers with a sensation. The three greatest geniuses of Poland, the poets Adam Mickiewicz and Julius Slowacki, as well as the composer Frédéric Chopin, had mothers who were baptized Jews. Their families belonged to the Jewish sect, the Frankists. Where could Przezslavsky get this information from? Shouldn't it simply be brushed aside? After all, he, as an inveterate reactionary and anti-Semite, could invent anything out of dark motives. The matter is complicated by the fact that the memoirist, a Polish nobleman by birth from the Grodno province, at the beginning of the 19th century studied at the Vilna University and became friends there with Adam Mickiewicz. From this wide personal connection, he could know a lot. In any case, the poet himself admitted that Mickiewicz's mother came from cross borders. But young Przezslavsky did not join the secret Polish circles, but instead entered the Tsarist service in order to make a successful career. Under Nicholas I, he was specifically involved in the affairs of the Kingdom of Poland, being an assistant secretary of state. Really quick note: this claim that Mickiewicz in particular was descended of Frankists is also echoed. I mean, just in kind of my cursory glance at this issue, he is also echoed by other correspondents of his, and I can't remember who. Maybe I'll look it up later. But there was one correspondent of his that claimed that he bragged about having Frankist origins or bragged about having Jewish origins. But again, this doesn't necessarily substantiate anything, but it is interesting circumstantial evidence to kind of throw into the mix here. He could perhaps even, Mickiewicz probably, could, because he was coming from a poor background, perhaps he didn't even know of his origins. Maybe he identified in some way with these origins because of his wife, or because of his weird sort of mystical views. I don't know. But just kind of important additional note there. After the suppression of the Polish uprising, a complete check of the nobility began for the legitimacy of belonging. Complete check of the noble began for the legitimacy of belonging to the gentry, referring to Mickiewicz. Only those people being inspected could retain their noble dignity if they provided the authorities with documents about their origin. Their testing lasted for years. I had the opportunity to familiarize myself with only a few of these nobilitation cases, many of which were deposited in the funds of the Historical Archive. Until recently, it was located in St. Petersburg in the Senate building on the Neva embankment. I personally have not seen any paperwork on checking the nobility of the members of the Mickiewicz and Chopin families, but it is quite possible that the documents on these cases could have been in the hands of Przezslavsky, because he served on the relevant commission, and in 1840 he even became its director of the chancellery. The names of famous Poles then attracted the close attention of the Tsarist authorities. So if his information cannot be accepted unconditionally, then we cannot exclude its reliability either. Moreover, there are other sources. For example, the brochure of the famous Polish poet Anthony Lange on the contradictions of the Jewish question, published in 1911. Coming from a family of baptized Frankists, he wrote that through his mother, Frédéric Chopin was half Jewish. True, Lange could not provide comprehensive evidence, but his testimony coincided with the conclusions of others. This became clear when materials about people who belonged to that largely mysterious Jewish sect were studied more deeply. Time to name the scientist whose work was mentioned at the beginning of the article. What primarily interested me was contained in the introduction and the first volume. The author convincingly argued that Friedrich Chopin's mother came from a Jewish family that converted to Christianity in the second half of the 18th century, that is, at the same time when other Jews, supporters of the Frankists, were baptized. The false messiah and the creator of a fairly large sect, Jacob Frank, decided to convert to Catholicism along with his supporters at a time when Polish Jewry had not yet recovered from the devastating Cossack pogroms. A native of the Galician town, Frank played the role of prophet and saint, but there was a rumor that it was difficult to separate the mystical rituals of the sectarians from the complete licentiousness during their secret gatherings. Excommunicated from Judaism, Frank found support from the Podolsk bishop. He promised the Jews deliverance from great contempt and humiliation from other nations if they believed in the Das religion that he invented. But you can come to it only through the adoption of Christianity. This intrigue pleased the top of the Catholic clergy. That's a kind of an oversimplification, but in any case. A series of adventures started by Frank led him to a demonstrative baptism in Warsaw in the presence of the royal family and the entire court. King Augustus III himself allegedly became his godfather. However, despite this, in 1760 he did not escape imprisonment in the fortress since his double game was revealed, ascribing divine origin to himself, observing the rituals of the sect, etc. And also the fact that he was taking on Mohammedan identity when traveling in Turkey, as mentioned earlier. The leader was imprisoned, but his supporters followed the intended path. Having studied the surviving documents, M. Mezes calculated that in 1759 to 60, about 1,000 Jews, Frankists, were baptized. By 1780, in Warsaw alone, there were, according to city authorities, at least 6,000. Soon, considerable benefits accrued to those who changed their faith became apparent. They were allowed to change their first and last names, which was a prelude to many receiving nobility, acquiring estates, and occupying prominent positions. True, moving up the social ladder was not easy. The clergy was suspicious of neophytes or new converts, monitored their lifestyle, and sometimes intercepted letters. In turn, already in 1764, the noble gentry, through the deputies of the Sejm, complained about the damage caused to them by the breed of neophytes, which multiplied throughout Poland. These recently baptized people, they say, act with innate dexterity and greed for noble privileges. Various official restrictions were introduced and then lifted against them. Under these conditions, the former Frankists tried to quickly erase traces of their Jewish past. They not only emphasized their commitment to Christianity, but even obscured biographies, sometimes concealed unwanted family connections, etc. It is not surprising if establishing the ethnic roots of this group is difficult. You don't say. Meanwhile, it has increased significantly over time and has taken a very prominent place in society. According to data collected by M. Mezes, by 1791, around 24,000 Frankists were baptized in Poland. That's crazy. Let us remember that Chopin's mother was born in 1782. This date itself does not indicate a change of confession by a particular family, but one should refer to the list of new names received by the neophytes of that period. There was a certain logic here. Among the newly minted gentry, there are many surnames derived from the names of days and months. For example, Niedzielski in Polish means Sunday, the Kwensinskis, April, the Chervinskis, June, the Majewskis, May appeared. A. Mistevich's mother, Barbara, bore the surname Majewskaya as a girl. My goodness. I can't wait to be done with this and never, or at least for a while, not have to pronounce any Eastern European names. The similarity of sound was used. Liberat was named after baptism. Jan Dominik Krasinski. The inventors of nicknames gave vent to their imagination, and sometimes there was a simple game of chance. Genealogies arose that at that time or later left their mark on history, sometimes even in more than one country. The Brzezinskis, the Piotrowskis, the Zimanovskis, the Zelinskis, etc. In a list compiled by M. Mezies of the names of Jews who were baptized and awarded gentry privileges, the Kisishanovskis also appeared. The author did not limit himself to pointing out that a change was made, characteristic of neophytes. In Poland, he wrote, there were also settlements, the names of which turned into the names of their owners, who came from noble gentry. But the Kishizanovskis, who entered the gentry class in the last decades of the 18th century, had nothing to do with hereditary possessions and did not get their names from such. This surname was given to converts to remind them of the symbol of Christianity, Kishish, that is, a cross. Thus, the loyalty of the converts and their submission to the new religion were publicly emphasized. But Justina Kishishanovska was, albeit poor, but still a relative of Countess Skarbek. Doesn't this alone indicate the closeness of the composer's mother to the circles of the noble gentry? An unexpected circumstance. In Chopin's biography, you can find information that the Countess herself, before her marriage, belonged to the bourgeois class and was the daughter of the banker Finger, another thread for anyone who would decide to resume searching the archives. The question, why look if one arises, can be answered. To complete the research, for scientific knowledge is carried out until the moment of complete comprehension of the truth. But I would be lying if I limited myself to this argument. There is also something here that goes beyond the boundaries of pure science. In Warsaw, captured by the Nazis, a scientist disappeared along with a typography of half of his book, manuscripts, and copies of documents, the one who substantiated the question of whether one of the greatest composers was Jewish by birth. Today there is an aggressive search for historical compromising evidence on the entire Jewish ethnic group, regardless of various linguistic, political, religious, and other choices of individual members. They say bad blood, bad heredity, and danger to other peoples. The most dangerous thing is to be indifferent to such aggression. Anyways, okay, so that's, I'm not going to read the rest of this, but yeah, that's a very interesting point about the origins of the surname of Chopin's mother that I keep mispronouncing and not going to try to pronounce now. It has this particular, it does not really have any connection to any of the gentry families. So perhaps, probable origins in the Frankist baptisms. Okay. So that's another interesting sort of thread to go down. Finally, I want to, after having established like cast of characters and different sort of currents and different sort of interesting rabbit holes to go down, I want to point out what I think is the significance of this particular question of the relation of Frankism to Polish Romanticism, nationalism, Messianism, etc. By reading this article that was published in, which is crazy to me, published by the University of Notre Dame's Church Life Journal, because this article is very masked off. This author, Paweł Rojek, wrote a whole book about John Paul II's kind of relationship to this messianic and just in general romantic kind of movement. There's another interesting article entitled, it has this kind of clickbaity title, Everything You Know About John Paul II's Early Lectures on Catholic Social Teaching is Wrong. Despite this, I mean, it's kind of an interesting article, but despite the title, it's pretty inconclusive and just kind of, I don't know, just throws a bunch of facts out there that are not really that interesting. But, you know, if you're interested in that, definitely check that article out as well. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of read through this, and I think with that I'm going to conclude this video. I think that, you know, there is significance in this particular historical period, and, you know, potential transmission or influence, because it, you know, could have played a large part in forming John Paul II, and in general, just the sort of ecumenical program that took place under John Paul II, and that seems to be, you know, still pretty prominent in the Vatican. You know, much more severe now, even. Okay. Getting pretty tired, so I'm sorry if I'm slurring words now. I've been talking maybe for close to 2 hours or something like that. Okay. On 18th of May 2000, the front page of the Polish newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza, let me actually zoom in here really quickly, featured a surprising poem by the novelist poet Czesław Miłosz entitled Ode for the 18th Birthday of Pope John Paul II. The most outstanding Polish poet of the 20th century paid an extraordinary tribute to the great Polish Pope on the pages of the country's most widely circulated liberal daily. Quote, "We come to you, men of weak faith, so that you might fortify us with the example of your life and liberate us from anxiety about tomorrow and next year. Your 20th century was made famous by the names of powerful tyrants and by the annihilation of their rapacious states. You knew it must happen. You taught hope, for only Christ is the Lord and Master of history." End quote. This was probably the first such unambiguously positive statement made by Miłosz about John Paul II. Earlier, Miłosz could not overcome his distance toward the Pope's work, even though he met him in private and attended discussions with him at Castel Gandolfo. He saw dangerous nationalist and theocratic threads in the Pope's work. Ode for the 18th birthday of Pope John Paul II was, however, something more than just a commemorative laudation. The poet formulated in the poem a penetrating thesis about the fundamental sources of inspiration for John Paul II's thought. John Paul II's thought. Quote, "Foreigners could not guess from whence came the hidden strength of a novice from Wadowici. The prayers and prophecies of poets whom money and progress scorned, even though they were the equals of kings, waited for you, so that you, not they, could announce urbi et orbi." It's a phrase that means, it's a Latin phrase that means city and world, namely, like, you know, the city of Rome and the world at large. That the centuries are not absurd, but a vast order history. End quote. For Poles, it is not difficult to guess that these poets, equals of kings, were the Polish Romantics. During the reburial of Julius Slowacki at Wawel Hill, Joseph Pilsudski, the head of state, issued the famous order: "On behalf of the government of the Republic, I command you, lords, to take the coffin to the royal crypt, for he was the equal of kings." And this is another kind of common thread in a lot of Polish nationalistic and romantic thought in general that I think is sort of rooted in their culture. Poland was one of these first constitutional monarchies, and so, you know, ideas of popular sovereignty seem to be seemed to be big in Poland. According to Milosz, it was the romantic legacy of Adam Mickiewicz, Julius Slowacki, and Zygmunt Krasinski, and above all that of Cyprian Camille Norwood, that was supposedly the hidden power of this modest cleric from Wadowice. Milosz's diagnosis was not, as one might expect, critical of these influences. His surprising poem was actually a change not only of his attitude toward the Pope, but also of his attitude toward the heritage of Polish Romanticism. In a few texts written toward the end of his life, Milosz even demanded that the writings of the Romantics he had criticized throughout his life be restored to the mainstream of Polish culture. Finally, John Paul II was to become, in his mind, as Milosz reiterated with growing appreciation, the last Polish Romantic. Karol Wojtyła was undoubtedly formed by Polish Romanticism. From early on in his life, the poetry of Polish 19th century bards fascinated him. He wrote poems referring to them, studied under the direction of outstanding experts in Romanticism, and during World War II, he created dramas firmly rooted in the tradition of Polish Messianism. The underground rhapsodic theater of Mieczysław Kotlarczyk, in which Wojtyła performed for several years, set itself the goal of realizing the romantic dreams of art transforming reality. This theater was associated with the underground organization Unia, which Wojtyła joined. Unia was directed by Jerzy Braun, a declared Polish Messianist, author of the Doctrine of Unionism, which developed many threads of Polish Romantic thought. This spiritual and intellectual heritage had a fundamental influence on the later teachings of John Paul II. During his travels to Poland, the Pope quoted the Romantic bards 38 times, including Norwood on 16 occasions. By comparison, St. Thomas Aquinas, Doctor of the Church, received only 2 mentions. The quote the Pope used during his first visit to Poland in Mieszno on June 3, 1979, from Mickiewicz's The Books of the Polish People and of the Polish Pilgrimage, that, quote, a civilization truly worthy of man must be Christian, can be regarded as the leitmotif of his whole pontificate. That's a very interesting quote too. A civilization truly worthy of man must be Christian. It's very anthropocentric, very, very, very much echoing Dignitatis Humani. During his first pilgrimage to Poland in 1979, John Paul II provocatively referred to himself as the Slav Pope. He was borrowing from the then very popular romantic prophetic poem by Slowacki entitled Our Slavic Pope. The act of confirming the nation of Poland made by the Pope at Krakow's Bologna was evidently an idea borrowed from the outstanding Polish Hegelian Messianist August Sieczkowski. And just kind of a brief digression on August Sieczkowski. I'd really like to know what, if it can be established, what John Paul II's kind of intellectual relationship is to this very, very important thinker. If you've heard of this guy at all, if you've studied like Hegel and Marx in any depth, this name has probably come up. And he is seen as being influential on Marx through Moses Hess, and kind of developing this idea of a philosophy of action or philosophy of praxis that Marx specifically, I think, makes most succinct and explicit in his theses on Feuerbach. That seems to be when he's really starting to begin to develop this favoritism toward a philosophy of action. Just to briefly glance over this guy's philosophical kind of milieu. Szyszkowski coined the term historiosophy in his 1838 work Prolegomena zur Historiosophy, a revision of the Hegelian philosophy of history. He adopted a threefold division of human history from medieval millenarians such as Joachim of Fiore, and mixed it with Hegelian categories and concepts. So this, the threefold historiography that has. I'm sure that some people watching this are very familiar with that concept, and all of its various connotations and historical kind of reinterpretations, and its mythology in general. He is arguably the creator of the philosophy of action, and again, what is meant here, he understands. He's kind of putting forward this idea of praxis as action oriented toward changing society in some way. So it's a sort of immanentist concept. It's more, he doesn't really understand it in the same way that Marx eventually sort of develops it. He's still sort of very religious in his thought, very idealistic in his thought, very much under the spell of Hegel, and keeping more in with Hegelian orthodoxy. But yeah, I mean, this is what he understands this to mean. So Szyszkowski's first period of history was that of antiquity. The second period was the Christian era, which represented the birth of reflectiveness, turning inwards and upwards from natural sensual immediacy toward the universal and abstract. The spirit existed for itself, for sich. This is a concept that you'll come across in Marxism with the Klasse für sich, the class that has an awareness of itself and acts in its own interests. This period was marked by an intolerable duality between the opposed worlds of the God and temporal existence, spirit and matter, action and thought. The Hegelian philosophy of spirit, thought, and universality at the expense of will, matter, and particularity. The Hegelian spirit had not yet experienced the division of mind and body, and living in a primal pre-reflective unity with nature, mainly expressing itself through art. The spirit was in itself, an sich, in Hegelian jargon. The existence represented the apotheosis and supreme manifestation of this period in history. The third period of history was the post-Hegelian era, in which the dualisms of the last were overcome and superseded. And I think there's some truth to this. I mean, I'm not necessarily granting credence to this particular concept, but there's some truth to the idea that, like, the world after Hegel has to have something to say about Hegel. I think if you want to be taken seriously as a philosopher, I mean, as a Catholic philosopher even, you have to have something to say about Hegel. And I mean, to be taken seriously, really seriously and systematic, as a systematic philosopher, you have to basically take down Hegel, or you have to provide a sort of systematic critique that might undo certain problematic aspects and inheritances of him. One thinker that I think in particular that is sort of involved in this project and that I find pretty interesting is William Desmond. But yeah, in general, I think there is some truth to the idea that, like, the world after Hegel does have to say something about Hegel. Yeah. The one-sided emphasis on thought in the Christian era would be overcome, and the spirit would assimilate nature to itself as well. Thus, philosophy would come to an end as the synthesizing and self-actualizing activity of the spirit now took the form of creative, practical activity. This final stage of the development of spirit represents the ultimate synthesis of opposites, God and world, necessity and freedom, desire and duty, heaven and earth are all as one. So again, this sort of meeting of heaven and earth, and this immanentism, right? So this is why I would like to know what is, if it could be discovered, what is Watia's relationship to this thinker. Unfortunately, University of Notre Dame professor emeritus Andrzej Waliki even wrote a letter to Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz, who is a Polish cardinal, and I think kind of John Paul II's Rasputin, maybe, so to speak, asking him to explain John Paul II's relationship to Tchaikovsky, but unfortunately did not receive an answer. During the next pilgrimage in 1983, the Pope, in a speech at Jasna Gora, clearly paraphrased Mickiewicz' Forefathers' Eve. Finally, during a visit in 1991 at their Mask in Krakow, he referred to the Romantic poet Julius Slowacki, recommending the nascent Third Republic. To all great saints, the blessed, to these great spirits, king spirits of our nation. The influence of Polish Romanticism is also visible in the Pope's teaching addressed to the whole world. And the famous letter to the artists was simply a commentary on Cyprian Norwood's thinking. Norwood's influence is also evident in the encyclical Laborem Exercens, which George Weigel described in Witness to Hope as the first social encyclical, which owes great theological inspiration to a poet. Here's where things get really interesting. There were also many surprising romantic gestures made by the Pope. In 1986 alone, during his visit to a Roman synagogue, John Paul II called the Jews older brothers in faith, referring to Mickiewicz' famous phrase. I believe this phrase appears in the charter that is proposed by Mickiewicz' Legion. I actually didn't even talk about that. I should have covered that earlier, but maybe that's for another time. But yeah, he uses this phrase. He refers to Jews as the elder brethren. So it would be. I wonder if this is where he's getting this from, or maybe he's getting it from somewhere else. Maybe it's just like because I think that the charter received recognition from the Vatican at that time. So maybe there are other, maybe it's just kind of a current of thought that affects, that has influence on the Pope rather than like, a direct reference. But it is something interesting to consider. He made an appeal for peace at the foot of Mount Blanc, perhaps alluding to the well-known Cordian monologue. Indeed, as Milosh noted, the reader of his writings and innumerable homilies sometimes has the impression that the spirit of the great Polish Romantics, doomed to fail, has been embodied in the head of the Catholic, namely Universal Church, and thus entered the scene of world history. Polish Romantic Messianism is not only the key to understanding the thought of John Paul II, but the work of John Paul II is also the key to understanding the heritage of Polish Messianism. One cannot properly understand many of the Pope's gestures and statements without linking them to the context of Polish thought. His theology of history, theology of suffering, and the theology of the nation are deeply rooted in the Polish Romantic imagination. Conversely, the further development of Polish Messianism proposed by John Paul II allows for a new reading of the Romantics. The poetic vision of building the kingdom of God on earth has been reformulated in the Pope's social teaching. That's kind of an interesting thing to consider as well. And, perhaps, tying in August Szyslowski. She is something Klowski. Where was it? The romantic vision of building the kingdom of God on earth has been reformulated in the Pope's social teaching. The idea of mission was justified in his reflection on cultures, and the bold thought of Poland as the Christ of nations, or the Christ of Europe, was deepened in papal meditations on suffering. All these themes were additionally included in the teaching on the three messianic functions of Christ as taught by the Second Vatican Council in Lumen Gentium. Really quick before continuing, the idea of like national mission is definitely not alien to Catholicism in general. I think it's just a question of like ordering the goods, right? And like, as stated in that first video that I played, determining what is the goal and what is the means. And, you know, and like, how can nations be said to be equal if one of them has like a messianic role, so to speak? But it's not as if, like, you know, I mean, France, I don't know, but France doesn't really have, it's not spoken of as having a messianic role. France is spoken of as the eldest daughter of the church, right? But I don't know. I mean, there's some weird language about France as well, so won't rule that out. Continuing, as a result, papal messianism seems to be the final form of Polish messianism. Similar intuitions were probably behind the decision to place the texts of Karol Wojtyła at the end of the recently published exhaustive anthology of Polish messianism. By understanding, I mean, that's a pretty wild gesture. By understanding the purpose of messianism, one can better understand the various elements of its history and, above all, separate what is essential from it from what is accidental in it. The falls and ridicules haunting the poet's work and biographies were not very important, Milosz wrote. If those poets found their fulfillment in a man more powerful than the kings and the temporal rulers of earth. Therefore, it is impossible to understand John Paul II without romantic messianism, or romantic messianism without John Paul II. You know, it's like, do we interpret this as like a baptizing of a particular sort of national current, like in the same way that we would look at the baptizing of Aristotle? I don't know. That's a big jump to make, you know, especially if there's quoting of these sort of eschatological notions. You know, I think it's different than just utilizing, for instance, like Aristotelian terminology in order to formulate certain theological truths. But I don't know. Continuing, the thesis about the romantic messianic sources of John Paul II's thought usually provokes one to two strong reactions. On the one hand, there are numerous defenders of John Paul II who at all costs want to purge him of any connections with the suspicious Polish tradition. If necessary, they are ready to recognize romantic influences, but only understood in such general terms that they become virtually invisible and certainly have nothing to do with the dangers, in their opinion, of messianism. On the other hand, the less numerous critics of John Paul II emphasize the romantic and messianic influences that they believe compromise his heritage. Between these two extremes, there are researchers who see the obvious influence of romantic messianism on Karol Wojtyła, but try to limit them only to the period of his youth or only to his literary creativity. In this way, the theological and philosophical teachings of the Pope are supposed to be protected from suspicious inspirations. The odium of messianism is too overpowering to allow for the development of a benign messianic interpretation of the entire teaching of John Paul II. As a result, the work of the Polish Pope, not only for the rest of the world, but above all in Poland, is interpreted from the perspective of scholastic philosophy, Spanish mysticism. He did have an interest in Carmelite theology and devotion, German phenomenology, French humanism, Italian personalism, Jewish philosophy of dialogue, anything but the immediate context of Polish romantic messianism. This is a mistake. All right, so a lot to chew on there, but that's kind of the capstone here. I want to understand this potential historical line of influence, because I'd like to know how this could potentially relate to contemporary Catholicism and ecumenism, eschatological ideas that are being imported from without, from outside. And so, yeah, that's the broader kind of imperative here. Okay, so let's wrap up. I put together some questions for consideration. And yeah, I mean, these will be just basically questions for consideration and further research. I haven't numbered actual questions. I just have kind of like topically numbered these. So, 1. Did the Grand Orient of Poland initiate any known Frankists? Did this attitude begin to change in the late 18th century, along with the Grand Orient of France? What was the attitude in general of the Grand Orient of Poland toward Jews? Oh, I think I meant to say that before the sentence. So, what was the attitude in general of the Grand Orient of Poland toward Jews? Did this attitude begin to change in the late 18th century, along with the Grand Orient of France? Did a similar change of Freemasonry to that of France from rational and deistic to mystical and Kabbalistic occur in Poland? Is there anything analogous to the involvement of Moses Dobrushka and other Frankist converts in the Asiatic Brethren? 2. Was there an awareness of Frankism among the Russian, Prussian, and Austrian intelligentsia, which Russia, Prussia, and Austria were these nations that partitioned Poland and later were the first three nations of the Holy Alliance? Was Polish independence seen as a vehicle for or even synonymous with Judeo-Masonic power by its neighbors, especially during the era of the Holy Alliance, or were there mostly cynical, imperialistic motives for partitioning and for the partitioning and suppression of Poland? How significant of a role did the Frankist converts play in the Polish-Russian War and the Kosciuszko Uprising? How significant of a role might their descendants have played in subsequent uprisings? 3. What are the origins of or factors attributed to Selina Zizmanowska's mental illness? And what did Andrzej Tojański's miraculous cure consist of? And was it in any way related to her claims about being an incarnation of Mary? What is the general character of Andrzej Tojański's influence on Adam Mickiewicz? And what particular heretical/heterodoxical views, for instance, metempsychosis, notions of divine spark, anti-clericalism, etc., did he impart on Mickiewicz, and which did Mickiewicz already subscribe to? What is the full character of Tojański's Mariology/concept of the Paraclete, or Holy Spirit? What is the broader cultural impact, if any, of the Circle of God's Cause? Because it is said to have existed for years after the death of Tojański. 5. What influence might Maria Zizmanowska have had on the formation of European intelligentsia and social networks, on the music of Chopin, and of Romantic culture in general, on the philosophy of Goethe, who is rumored to have been in love with her? Could her salon have acted as a breeding ground for revolutionary thought in Russian territory given the suppression of lodges? And finally, what influence might Mickiewicz have had on the intellectual formation of Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II? Is his later activity in any way influential? Meaning like kind of like the era of where he's forming his legion, which I didn't even talk about. I should have covered that, but that's a particularly interesting era of his life. Might his involvement with Andrzej Tojański's Circle of God's Cause have influenced him? Wojtyła, by which I mean. Are there trace influences of Tojańskism? What influence might the Mickiewicz Legion's declaration of the Elder Brethren have had on Wojtyła? When and where did he begin using this phrase? What influence might Augustus Siekowski have on Karol Wojtyła? If direct evidence cannot be established, what circumstantial evidence exists in his text which would point to direct or indirect influence? In what way can Wojtyła be said to subscribe to a practical philosophy or praxis understood as action oriented toward changing society? Should the ecumenism of John Paul II's pontificate be read in light of these influences? All right, so those are my questions for consideration and to prompt further research. I think maybe the next time I get around to talking about this publicly, inquiring into these questions publicly. I'm going to be looking at this paper, Selina Zimanowska as a Frankist by Jadwiga Maurer. I'm pronouncing so many words incorrectly because of how tired I am. And also I'll talk probably about the Miskovitz Legion and the importance of that, perhaps. All right, I'm going to cap it off there. Thanks for watching.